Welcome to Irish Granny Helen. I had to turn my light on. We are continuing with our Saturday book, Going Hollywood by Sara Jordan Heintz, and this is number 6. 6. So, we're just going to continue. This is the story of Midwesterners in movie land. Some great stuff here. So we just finished talking about Dorothy Dandridge. So now we're on chapter 9, Rock Hudson, Unraveling the Myth. He was called the most classically handsome star in Hollywood. Well, I'm sorry, but I disagree with that. I believe that Cary Grant was the most classically handsome. Rock Hudson is a type. Cary Grant, I mean, how could you possibly argue? Tall, dark, and handsome. Anyway, 1957, for the next 7 years after, he was elected number 1 as the star with the most name power. So from 57 until 64-ish, he was the star you wanted in your movie to make the most money. He had so much drawing power, allure. His movies that he made with Doris Day captured the sexual mores of the 50s and 60s. They certainly did. They're very dated to watch. They were called bedroom comedies, and they do seem really tame today. And the gender politics, it's a thing. But Rock Hudson was an anomaly. He was very private. He shunned fans and the media. He didn't seek out the attention as do some stars. He would give elaborate parties, but invitation only and for only his closest friends. He liked to be the center of attention, and his passion was music. I thought this was interesting. He had thousands of LPs. My husband is like that. See this thing over here? This is a part of his collection of LPs. Some of them are just old rock and roll stuff, and even older. My son-in-law gets dibs. He can hardly wait for my husband to die so he can have them. I'm afraid to go anywhere near them. You know, they're a collection. He had an interesting hobby for man at the time. Not historically all that unusual, but at the time. He was really into needlepoint, which I think that's fabulous. He did gardening, and he was very talented at landscaping, and he liked to barbecue. He would turn a blind eye to conflict. He really was avoidant, and he lived his whole life in denial. The truth was too painful, and we will delve into that. Well, part of it is for years he was voted Hollywood's most eligible bachelor. And his response was, well, I just haven't found the right woman. I'm too busy making movies to settle down. He often was the escort for beautiful women stars. That was intentional on the part of the studio. He did get married, but it was kind of set up by the studio. It was a sham. So he made these movies. They were very popular. He remained the elusive unmarried bachelor that everybody was hoping they'd be the woman, you know. And time went by. And in 1985, he was seen in public, because he was a bit of a recluse, seen in public looking really terrible. People were shocked by how his appearance had deteriorated. And it looked like he had something medically wrong with him. Like, was it cancer? Was he addicted? Was he into alcohol? He was skeletal, and people were concerned maybe he was anorexic. But he hid the truth for over a year before it finally came out. He was dying of AIDS, and he hid it. I'm sure most of us remember what that was like in the early to mid 80s, when they knew that this had broken out. They didn't know what it was. They thought it was cancer at first because people were getting Kaposi sarcomas, those black tumors. But the reality is it was transmitted through certain bodily fluids, started being passed around in the gay community. And the truth that he'd been hiding with more or less success for a very long time was he'd been gay, he'd been homosexual his whole life, of course, his whole life. And he came out publicly and became the face for this terrible pandemic. So that was how he ended his life, but we'll, how his life ended, and we'll return to that. But first, let's talk about his background. He was born, and this is just a crack up. His name is a crack up. Roy Harold Shearer Jr., born November 17th, 1925. He would be 100 years old this year, were he alive, 100 years ago. That's phenomenal to wrap your mind around. He was born in Winnetka, Illinois. His father walked out on the family when he was 5, and decades later, he Rock Hudson found out that his father left the family because he doubted Rock's paternity. I can't call him by his birth name. He doubted his paternity. His father did. So in a year after that, excuse me, his mother married Wallace Fitzgerald. And of course, he was abusive to both of them. And her name was Kay, and she actually married him and divorced him twice. They lived an impoverished life. Rock was a poor student. His outlet really was the movies. That's all he cared about. And he became a theater usher so that he would have more access. His favorite star was Lana Turner. It inspired him to do school plays, and he couldn't remember his lines. And he was very self-conscious. At 14, he was already 6 feet tall. And so he had trouble remembering his lines. He was self-conscious about his height. After high school, he entered the Navy, and he became an airplane mechanic. Now, this is during the war, of course. So he was an airplane mechanic from 1943 to 1946. And after that, he got out and he moved to Long Beach, where his father was. He moved with his father. And he knew at this point that he wanted to act. His father didn't welcome him. His father had a new wife and an adopted daughter, and he'd moved on. Remember, he doubted that Rock was his actual biological son. So Rock kind of went from job to job. He was a vacuum cleaner salesman, a truck driver, a mail carrier. Unbeknownst to the public, this wasn't well known for a very long time, but he discovered the Long Beach gay subcultures. He had a relationship with a guy called Ken Hodge, who was a radio producer. He had a relationship with a guy called Henry Wilson, who was a talent agent. And this helped him to make up his stage name. So they came up with Rock Hudson from the Rock of Gibraltar and the Hudson River. And at first he spelt it R-O-C, but eventually, they added the K. He successfully got a minor role at Warner Brothers in a movie called Fighter Squadron. He had one line, and it took him 38 takes. So they had to simplify the line for him because he simply couldn't remember it. The director, named Walsh, had enough, and he sold Rock's contract to Universal in 1949. And there he was put in a lot of B movies. He learned to fence. He learned to ride horses. He took ballet. This reminds me very much of Marilyn Monroe. People who took their craft of acting seriously understood that, and true today, that if you're going to be in a movie, you may be called upon to perform at something, and it would behoove you to be able to do a variety of different things. You'll find in the past, especially, serious actors didn't spend all their time club hopping and partying. They were studying from morning till night when they weren't on stage. However, he really did like the pampering of the studio. The studio took care of everything, he said. They get you your house, a car, airline tickets, special shoes. All you have to do is concentrate on your performance. There was no better method of training. He said this after, years went by. His personal life blossomed as he came into adulthood. In 1951, he met a guy called Mark Miller and another called George Nader. They were a couple, and they became his lifelong friends. There was a little bit of self-preservation in this relationship, which they all fully admitted. It was easier for men at the time if they did things in threes. If you were only two men, people might raise an eyebrow, but three men together didn't attract as much attention. They taught him how to play bridge, and he met many big shots at bridge parties. Bridge was big in that time period. He began a series of films in which he was a man's man. For example, he was a boxer, and he became a Western heartthrob, and he got more attention than even Jimmy Stewart did, which doesn't surprise me. No comment. Fan magazines called him the Beefcake King. Oh, there were tips in the fan magazines. How to become Mrs. Hudson. Bachelor on the loose. What kind of romance does he want? They were endlessly fascinated with this guy being single. He was depicted, very smart. He put forward this narrative that he was just so picky. He couldn't find a woman to meet his high standards, his exacting demands. He was painted as a persnickety movie star hunk for whom no woman would ever meet his standards. In February of 1952, he told columnist Bob Thomas that when his dates want to get more serious, he simply gives them the cold shoulder. Rock didn't chase women. They went after him. Rock found women attractive, and this is not the narrative, this is true. He was actually bisexual, but he preferred men. And so he could play that role for the sake of safety for him. Where am I here? In 1954, he made The Magnificent Obsession with Jane Wyman. We talked about that a week or two ago when we covered Jane Wyman. It was his breakthrough role, Universal's most profitable film to that point, too. He became a top star with more than 3,000 fan letters a week. Women were in love with him. Let's see. This is from Life magazine at the time. They did a cover story on him. Fans are urging 29-year-old Hudson to get married or explain why not. There was trouble indeed. Hudson wasn't in the closet. He was in the dungeon. In other words, he was lying low. Confidential magazine asked his friends and roommate Jack to out him. So there were suspicions afoot in maybe behind the scenes journalistic uh, minds, but the public in general didn't glom onto that. The girls were still all Twitter about him. We lived in fear of an expose, is what he said. His friend George Nader talked about it too. He said, every month when Confidential came out, our stomachs began to turn. Oh, which of us would be in it? The amazing thing is that Rock was never nailed. He seemed under supernatural protection. Confidential asked, okay, well, I already got there. Okay, so he lived in sin briefly with a woman, and it wasn't okay with the studio. And therefore, this marriage, was created. They got married in Santa Barbara with very little fanfare. He married a woman named Phyllis Gates. And he gave Hedda Hopper and Luella Parsons the scoop. Big question everybody wanted to know. Did Phyllis Gates know that her new husband was gay? People didn't ask it then. People ask it now. In 1956, he made the movie Giant. He made $100,000 in that movie, and he was nominated for Best Actor. He got along really well with Elizabeth Taylor. Both were hard drinkers, and they invented the chocolate martini, which, I don't know. The next movie they made together wasn't until 1980 when they made The Mirror Cracked, but they remained close friends, and she publicly supported him when he went public with AIDS. She raised a ton of money for AIDS research. I remember what a true star she was in that time. In 1959, he made the movie Pillow Talk, which was hugely popular and made him even better known. It was called A Day's Work of Fun, and he created a very close bond with Doris Day. They had really good chemistry on camera, really good rapport. They looked and they acted like a real couple. It's really true. He didn't like the script. He'd never really done comedy before. He was uncertain. He said, I was quite apprehensive, nervous and scared because I've never played comedy. Director Michael Gordon told him to be humorous. An actor had to take the line seriously because if you think you're funny, nobody else will. Oh, maybe that's my problem. I don't know. Anyway, April of 1958, Phyllis had filed for divorce, and her explanation was that he was just disinterested and never at home. Luella wrote about it, but no one ever really figured out what led up to it. He hired a tough attorney. This is hard to calculate in our numbers, but Phyllis got $250 a month for 10 years, the house, a T-Bird, and stock in his next 7 pictures. Stock in his film company, 7 pictures. In 1961, she filed to get an increase in the money, and she instead was given a lump sum of $130,000. Rumors were that she'd write a tell-all in the 80s when he was dying, and she didn't. She waited and she went public later when she wrote a memoir, My Husband, Rock Hudson. I would like to read that. I just haven't had time. So let me know if anyone's read it. Let me know if it's any good. Rock went into full denial mode and acted like the whole marriage thing had never happened. He moved to Newport Beach, where he sailed and he partied a lot. In 1960, he went to Mexico to make The Last Sunset. And then he went to the Italian Riviera. Funny how they make these movies in all these really nice places. The Italian Riviera for Come September with Gina Lollobrigida. It was the first movie shown on international and transcontinental flights. He got so much fan media, it's crazy. In 61, with Doris Day again, he made Lover Come Back. I wrote, so gendered. Oh my God. So she's this, he's an advertising agency executive, and he steals an account from her. She's in a rival firm, and she begrudges his tactic of plying clients with booze and women, while she goes a more professional approach. And they did a split screen where she confronts him and she says, I don't use sex to land an account. And he says, when do you use sex? And she says, I don't. And he says, my condolences to your husband. And she says, I'm not married. And he says, oh, that figures. She says, what do you mean? And he goes, a husband would be competitive. There's only room for one man in the family. And she says, oh, I wish I were a man right now. And he says, keep trying. I think you'll make it. This is what I meant by so gendered. I read this and I went, oh, God. But, you know, the mores of the time. February of 1962, Rock was on the cover of Life magazine, and the article actually said he leads a double life. He lives in reality and works in make-believe. I wonder what they really meant there. He was hero worshipped. That was his public image. But in reality, he was shy and introverted. He was into music and chess and astronomy, and he was an antiques lover. And yeah, I think I said he did landscaping too. He was very good at that. Lover Come Back was a gigantic hit, and it was his favorite that he made with Doris Day. In 63, they made Send Me No Flowers. Rock dated women. He began a relationship with Maxwell, who we will talk about subsequently. In 61, she got divorced, and they spent time together. He would sit at the piano and she would sing. He called her Max. In 62, he proposed to her, but with a caveat that he could always have boyfriends. She thought this was, just a fad. She thought he'd settle down into a heterosexual married life, and they decided to remain loving friends, but they never got married. Luella Parsons, of course, who, it's like whack-a-mole with her. She always has something to say. She reported them as an item, and Marilyn called him, and she referred to him as the best friend I ever had. He became a surrogate father to her son, Matthew, and in 72, when she died young, Rock wanted to adopt Matthew, but the biological father, who really was not close, stepped in. Kind of broke Rock's heart. He really did feel like a father. He made several pictures a year, but then that slowed down in the 60s, and slowly he aged out of the top sex symbol star. In 71, he actually made pornography with Angie Dickinson. Maids all in a row. According to Roger Ebert, quote, Rock Hudson sex comedies sure have changed since Pillow Talk. His biographer, Sara Davidson, worked with him in the last months of his life, and he expressed in this book disdain for young actors. In the last 10 to 15 years of his life, he drank a lot. His good looks went out of style in the 60s. He just was a type, And just as he hit the top, the style changed, and he never took a bad picture said of him. That they also say that about Marilyn Monroe. It's interesting. Uh, I can't read my writing. He called them the bitter Uggs, the little Uggs, like Dustin Hoffman. Oh, young actors. He was making a commentary on how unattractive and unique young actors were in style. He belonged to a Manhattan Beach gay group that sent out party invitations. They sent out a joke invitation without him knowing, announcing the marriage of Rock Hudson and Jim Nabors. And it wasn't meant to be public, but somehow it got circulated, and a columnist found out about it. I wonder if her name was Luella. And there was an expose. It was meant in good fun, but a columnist got hold of one of the invitations and wrote an expose. While the actors were not named, the writer made a lame attempt at revealing their identities by reporting how two male actors had wed, and that one is like the Rock of the Gibraltar and the other is like your neighbor. Television, radio, and print media picked up the story. Rock used his wit to charm the press into dropping the story by joking, "It's over. I've returned all the emeralds and diamonds that Jim gave me." Urban legend has it the men were married in the home of Carol Burnett, a close friend of Rock's. Legend. After this incident, Neighbors ended their friendship. He was trying to be on the down low. Rock decided what the heck, and he began having men romantically involved with him stay at his house. You know, the cat was out of the bag. For example, Tom Clark, MGM publicist, who Rock said was the most important man in my life, and they became best friends. In 1973, they moved in together. Hudson he even told Davidson for the book the truth of that. But in 1990, Clark published Rock Hudson, Friend of Mine, and denied a physical relationship. So Clark was denying it while Hudson was putting it in his biography. For a long time, he believed TV was beneath him, but he finally agreed to do a pilot, which eventually became Macmillan and Wife, which was kind of a modern take on The Thin Man. And it lasted 6 years, 71 to 77. He got, $120,000 an episode. He was the highest paid TV star at that time. He didn't like the speed of filming of television shows. He felt the scripts were inferior. He didn't like the continuity because they would film things using sets that were set up and available. And so they may not even actually belong to the same episode. So let's say they're doing 5 different shows, all using the living room in one scene. They would do each living room scene one after the other, and the storylines were not related. It was hard for him to get into that. He said the plots never made sense. And the other thing is the last scene was always shot first, and this was confusing for him too. He loved the stage. He made a number of shows in London on tour and was King Arthur in Camelot in one production. I never knew that. He got a new show on TV in 1981, but he had a severe heart attack and a quintuple bypass and transfusions. Transfusions. And he began smoking again in the recovery room. Oh my God. The show that he was going to do didn't do well. He made his last movie in 1984, The Ambassador. He had a bad liver from drinking. he had this bad heart from this heart attack, and there was something else going on with him that they weren't able to figure out. He couldn't keep food down. He sweated through the night. He developed itchy body sores, and most telling, he developed a spot on his neck known as Kaposi sarcoma, a tumor caused by human herpes virus 8. In June of 84, Rock Hudson learned he had AIDS. He flew to Paris to receive an experimental drug. By November, he was in better health and his blood tested negative. However, one needed treatment every few months and he refused to go back for nearly a year. But he told friends that he'd beaten the disease, and yet he was showing declining health. But he got a regular part on a show called Dynasty, and he freaked out when he realized in one scene he had to kiss Linda Evans, and it was very awkward kiss. It was barely a kiss because he was afraid of making her sick. Remember, very little was understood at the time. He was let go because he couldn't remember his lines, and he had impaired speech because he had infections in his mouth. He lost 50 pounds. There's discussion, about how he contracted HIV. It could have been the transfusions during his heart surgery. It could have been his interaction with people. In 85, he was invited to appear on the Doris Day show, as a new show she had. He was gaunt and sickly looking. It was his last role. She said it was his final thing, and it was with me, and I really cherish that. Davidson, the biographer, recorded his life and pieced together the puzzle of it with the dying Rock. He wasn't brave enough to talk about AIDS. He just never did. He wanted it hush hush. He thought it was unclean, a plague, which was, very common attitude. He was afraid it would destroy his image, his legacy. He collapsed in Paris, and this officially, it sort of forced an announcement, and they admitted publicly. And he flew home, and he died on October 2nd, 1985. He was only 59. He was cremated, and his ashes were scattered at sea. They founded the Rock Hudson AIDS Foundation. He gave $250,000 for that. And the advance royalties of his autobiography, written by Davidson, posthumously finished by her. In 85, a scorned lover, Mark Christian, sued his estate. He had been with Christian in 83, but he'd broken up because Christian wouldn't leave. I mean, it was one of those, couldn't get rid of him type of situations. And Rock was afraid to tell him that he broke up with him because of the AIDS. So when he found out that he tested negative, when Christian found out that he tested negative, he filed a suit for intentional infliction of emotional distress. And he got $22 million in damages in 1989. Wow. But a court, I guess it was an appeal, the court brought it down to $5.5 million. There's a book about the case written in 2010 by an attorney, Robert Mills, called Between a Rock and a Hard Place. This was the first case that sued anybody for exposure to the virus. It still shocks and surprises people to learn that a handsome man, desired by women, preferred men, and died of AIDS. I was going to say, what rock are they living under if they don't get that? But bad pun. He was the master of compartmentalizing his life. There's a rumor that he had a secret love child, and was it Richard, I don't remember who Richard was, on his deathbed, he admitted that this was his biggest regret, was not getting to know Richard. Uh, For some weird reason, I didn't write down. Well, we shall ask Sara because she's going to remember. Anyway, his biggest regret was not getting to know this Richard, who might have been his child, but nobody knows. His friend, his longtime close friend, George Nader, said there is no Rock Hudson. There are many Rock Hudsons. So that was the story of Rock Hudson. If you get the opportunity this week, watch those movies. Watch a couple of his movies with Doris Day. They're really pretty funny. Okay, chapter 10. Marilyn Maxwell. Now this is the love of his life, the love of her life anyway. The Forgotten Marilyn. She was a singer, a dancer, an actress. She performed for the troops. She also was blonde. Her private life was stormy, and her heart was often broken. She was born Marvel Marilyn Maxwell, August 3rd, 1922, in Iowa, a place called Clarinda, Iowa. Glenn Miller was also born there, and it was the site of the first hamburger cafe. Her father sold insurance. Her mother was a pianist. They divorced when she was a baby. Her mother took the kids and became a traveling pianist for modern dancer Ruth St. Denis. So when she did her shows around the country, Marilyn and her mother and the other kids all traveled together. Marilyn made her stage debut at the age of 3, and she began to sing on the radio in Des Moines. She said, "My mother tried to fulfill her ambitions through me." She had a very pushy stage mom. It's mentioned all the time. At 15, she moved to Indiana and played the organ in a Fort Wayne theater for silent films. She was hired on to sing with the band for $35 a week. So she quit school in her sophomore year to go join the band. She went on a nightclub tour with them and got hired by a series of famous band leaders. Ted Weems got her to go to Pasadena Playhouse, where he'd finance her admission there, to learn how to act as an investment, because he hoped she'd sign on with the studio and would be able to pay him back. She sang with Perry Como, but when he got big, he never reciprocated and asked her to be on his show. In 1942, she did a Paramount screen test. She did a Bomb movie with Robert Taylor. Not so great. Then she went on tour with the USO and got home to an offer from MGM. They made her drop the Marvel on her name. This upset her mother, who named her that because she thought it would look good on a movie marquee. In 1943, she made a movie called Salute to the Marines. She made several Dr. Gillespie films with Lionel Barrymore. She appeared in 10 films in 1943. Can you imagine 10 movies? That's a lot of memorizing. In 1944, she met her first husband on the Abbott and Costello set. She had a huge crush on Frank Sinatra. And, if you've never seen Phil Hartman's rendition of Frank Sinatra on Saturday Night Live, you might want to look into that. She married a guy called John Conti, and within 2 years, they were divorced. She started spending time with Sinatra. She was the first guest on his radio show. They were friends, but they were crazy about each other. He wanted to divorce his wife, Nancy, for Marilyn Maxwell. But he was advised against it by associates. He bought Marilyn a diamond bracelet, and Nancy found out about it, and he was confronted. And he eventually divorced her, and then he went on to marry Ava Gardner. And Ava was upset when Marilyn Maxwell showed up in New Jersey to hear Frank sing. She was pretty jealous. Ava left in a huff, and she sent a note to Frank with her wedding ring included. And she later admitted, maybe I overreacted. Marilyn was cast in 1946 in the Ziegfeld Follies, and she did some songs with Lucille Ball and Jimmy Durante, but they were cut. She was invited to be a regular on Bing Crosby's Kraft Music Hall. She did USO tours. She was cast as Red Skelton's wife in The Show Off. In 1948, she released Summer Holiday. This was really her first real acting role. She got out of her MGM contract and freelance. There are a lot of parallels here between her and Marilyn Monroe. It's interesting. In 48, she made Race Street with RKO, and then did a show at the London Palladium with Jack Benny. Marilyn Monroe did a show with Jack Benny. In 49, she made a film noir called Champion with Kirk Douglas. And in 1950, she got a role in Key to the City with Gable and Loretta Young. We knew what was up. In 1950, she remarried 31-year-old Anders McIntyre, the owner of Encore Run. They were married at the Santa Barbara Biltmore. Everybody got married in Santa Barbara. There were allegations of affairs and physical altercations, and they were divorced in 51. In 1950, in June, she was the first female performer to go to Korea, and she described it as rugged. Marilyn Monroe also went to Korea. Her father died in 1950. Her mother died in 51, and she missed both funerals because she was on tour with USO. She began an affair with Bob Hope while on tour. In 51, she made the Lemon Drop Kid with Bob Hope. And the affair was pretty open. She was often referred to as Mrs. Hope. Dolores Hope, his real wife, claimed our marriage is stronger than ever, while secretly she was begging Bob to end this affair. But it was really common knowledge. Probably Luella Parsons talked about it. It was common knowledge that common knowledge with the USO that Bob and Marilyn were romantically involved. Maxwell's personal secretary, Jean Greenberg, said Bob asked Marilyn to marry him when they were in Ireland together, but she turned him down because she knew Dolores would never give him a divorce because Dolores is a Catholic. So they made several more pictures. She made several more pictures through 1953. She had really bad eyesight. In 1948, she had a Christmas Eve party, and Marilyn showed up uninvited. Oh, I guess Bob Hope had a party, and Marilyn showed up uninvited. She suggested to Marilyn Monroe, Norma Jean, that she pick a different stage name. She didn't want to share the name Marilyn. So they had this conversation when she encountered Marilyn Monroe. She said, really, you need to pick a different name, Marilyn. I have dibs on Marilyn. 8 years later, Marilyn Monroe was by far the bigger star. Here's a picture, and you can see why they were very similar. Very similar. So Marilyn Monroe became the bigger star. I was the only Marilyn in pictures until she came along, Maxwell said. I suppose she's subject to the same confusion, but people often call me inadvertently Miss Monroe. My answer is no. This is bad. I'm the Marilyn with her clothes on. Even friends would poke fun at the mistaken identity. As a prank, classmates from high school took the Monroe calendars and pasted Maxwell's head on the body. She met Rock Hudson. She called him Big Sam while filming for Universal. He was 3 years her junior. Rumor is she wanted to marry him and start a family, but instead she married Jerry Davis, who was 5 years older, on November 21st, 1954. And now we all know the undercurrents that were going on there. Davis was suspicious of Rock. Why was he always around is what he wanted to know. So, for example, when Marilyn got sick, Rock came over to the house and stayed at her house to help take care of her while her husband was there. They were very good friends. They really were very good friends. April 28th of 56, she gave birth to her only child, Matthew. And Tom Clark, Rock's friend, said, I could certainly understand why Rock fell for her, but I think he loved her son, Matthew, even more. He and Rock had a great relationship. Matthew was the son Rock had always wanted. He loved playing football with the boy and doing other father-son activities. Broing out. In 1960, after about 6 years, they got divorced, and she blamed her husband's extreme cruelty and gambling. Davis had told her the day after they got married, this is sad, that he married her because she was a glamour girl and could help support him. She said, I thought that was an odd sense of humor, but later I found out he wasn't kidding. Terrible. She got $500 a month and $150 child support. Her agent said she picked the wrong men. She brought on her own problems. Dorothy Kilgallen reported that Marilyn said that she and Rock were just good friends. So there was apparently a lot of gossip going around. In April of 1960, she spent an hour every day in the gym. And she, creative ways to make money. She developed Marilyn Maxwell's sensational 30 pounds in 30 days diet. You buy it for 10 cents. It was an advice pamphlet. In the margin, I wrote, sure. She did the TV version of Bus Stop, which is interesting because that was what Marilyn Monroe played. But she didn't play the same role. She didn't play Sherry. She played the owner of the diner. And it was on television for 26 episodes in 61 and 62. But she left the show after 13 because she said, all I ever did in this show was pour coffee. And she also pointed the way to the men's room. Those were the two things. She hoped to get in the movie Lover come back, but Doris Day got it. She was bitter that she didn't have a Hollywood star on the Walk of Fame. It's like she was like Marilyn Monroe, but Marilyn Monroe outshone her. She was like Doris Day, but Doris Day outshone her. Really kind of sad, just bad timing, huh? She didn't like being stereotyped. In 63, she made The Critics' Choice with Bob Hope. She made a few more meh films. In 70, she made she made the Sphinx, which was a cult classic. And it is Sphinx, not Sphinx. She spent the late 60s and the early 70s doing television and burlesque for money. She sold household cleaning products. Her last role, she played an aging stripper on a TV episode of some show. Then in 72, she was offered roles, including the return to Peyton Place. She called Rock Hudson with the news, But the next day she collapsed. She had heart, lung, and blood pressure problems that killed her. She was only 49. Her son found her. Rock came over to help him. He hated the circus her funeral was. He was appalled. And he said, don't ever let them turn my funeral into a circus like poor Marilyn's. Bob Hope delivered the eulogy. He said, if all our friends were here today, we'd have to use the Coliseum. All her friends were here today, we'd have to use the Coliseum. Marilyn had an inner warmth and love for people, and the thousands of servicemen she entertained over the years felt this. Who would have thought this little girl from Clarinda, Iowa, would do this much and go as far as she did? Who knows why some of us are called earlier than others? Maybe God needed a lovely gal to sing and cheer him up, and so he called her. I must say it was a great job of casting. Ooh. Sirens. Lights. Who's coming up my street? Is it ambulance? Hang on, nothing ever happens here. I wonder if you could hear that. That was the ambulance. When something like that happens, the whole town comes to a screeching halt. Sorry. She was cremated and her ashes were scattered at sea. After her death, she left her estate and said, don't bother to contest it. She left it to her 15-year-old son. But I guess nobody did contest it, but her niece had this to say. She was a warm, affectionate, kind person. She had a great sense of humor. She loved to laugh. I wish we had lived closer and been able to see more of her. I think she regretted that too. My father was her only family, really. Even though we didn't see her very often, she always made us feel special. My aunt loved performing. It was what she wanted to do. It seemed to me that it was just a natural thing for her to pursue. I wish she had the chance to be in some more movies that utilized her talents more. It's a difficult business. And that's the story of Marilyn Maxwell, who, is really remarkably lesser known. I guess I wouldn't say she's unknown, but she's certainly not well known. That's the end of part 6. So I'm gonna end it here, and we do have a couple more stars coming up, and I'm going to be hoping to have a conversation with Sara. Of course, would help if I actually invited her. She knows, she's aware, so I've got to get in touch with her. And if you have questions about any of these stars you'd like me to ask her, send them to me, email them to me, because I'd be happy to include them in my conversation with her. So have a good weekend. I hope you don't hear any sirens coming up your street. It makes me nervous these days, Thank you very much for watching. Have a good rest of your weekend. Slán go fóill and slánte.